My name's Simon Jupp. I'm the ontology project lead in the samples, phenotypes and ontologies team here at the EBI. And I want to give you a quick overview of the ontology lookup service. And as I don't really know all your backgrounds, I'll give a short background on ontologies and why they're important and interesting to us, and then I'll go in with a live demo of the OLS system and show you some of the features there. So, ontologies in the life sciences, why do we care about these things? So generally, we're trying to deal with the situation where we have lots of different words and terminologies that we use for the same concepts. And ontologies help us in that they help us build standards for the terminology that we use in a particular domain. Ontologies are particularly useful because they allow us to define the terminology of our domain and organize these into categories. And when we start to annotate data with these terminologies, it helps us to organize this data. It helps us to integrate the data so that we don't have to rely on integrating data based on free text. We can actually use numerical identifiers for concepts such as disease or anatomy or species to pull data together. Ontologies also allow us to capture the relationships between things. So typically we organize our terms into hierarchies of types or parent-child type relationships, but there are other types of relationships that can hold between concepts. So a good example would be to think of anatomy and how anatomical parts are related through partonomy relationships. So why do we need these terminology standards? So if we consider a disease such as dyschromatopsia, on the right here you've got lots of different ways of describing, or terms that will describe color blindness. This is an abnormality of the eye, it affects the vision. So there's a whole bunch of ways that we could think about describing this disease. And we can see very easily example from searching the literature. If I search for color blindness against something like PubMed, I see I get 647 results. If I search for dyschromatopsia, I get slightly less results of 270. And if I want to search for something more generic, like an abnormality of the eye, I actually get no results because the search engine here is not able to understand that color blindness and dyschromatopsia are types of abnormality of the eye. And this is an area where ontologies can help. So if we wanted to build an ontology of color blindness, we would essentially start assigning accessions to these terms. So we've got dichromacy here. This is a type of dyschromatopsia. This is a type of abnormality of color vision. And we can have other relationships in our ontologies, such as dyschromatopsia has the disease location in the eye. So we can start to build a conceptualization of what we understand about these terms. And we can attach other metadata to these terms, so we can capture the color blindness as a type of synonym, and we can provide a full human readable definition for each of these concepts. And this is typically what we do when we build ontologies. And over the last 10, 15 years, there's been a real push to develop ontologies for the life sciences. So this is a fairly old slide now, but it gives a good overview of the range of ontologies that have been developed that cover most domains that we care about, right down from genotypes. So we've got sequence ontologies, ontologies that describe gene products, cell type ontologies, tissue ontologies, developmental stage ontologies, right up to phenotypes and ontologies that deal with disease. And we use these ontologies in a whole host of ways, some of which I've already mentioned. But the real point is that ontologies add value to the data. So we can do smarter searching over our data and provide smarter searching services when it's backed by an ontology. So some of the services at the EBI, like Array Express, there's a real good example of where the ontology is being used in the background to help guide your search and find more results. Ontologies are used for data analysis, so there's good examples in the literature of how things like the gene ontology are used for gene function analysis. And we have various applications here at the EBI where ontologies are used for data integration and also data visualization. So there's a nice example in the GWAS catalog of how we annotate traits with ontology terms, and we can generate visualizations, and you can tailor those visualizations based on the domain that you're interested in, so tailored by certain types of anatomy or cell types, for instance. So given that there's all these ontologies out there, what we need is a way of storing and having unified access to all these ontologies, and that's what the Ontology Lookup service is essentially providing. It's a repository of over 150 biomedical ontologies that are relevant for data at the EBI. Currently contains around 4.5 million terms and holds 11 million relationships between those terms. And it's primarily a search engine where you can come and find terms based on searching for labels and synonyms or their identifier. You can browse and visualize these ontologies in a range of ways. So we have ways to view the tree or to view the ontology as a graph. And the primary use of the actual service is via the API, so to give you programmatic access to all these ontologies. So we provide a RESTful API to these ontologies, and there's a whole bunch of third-party libraries for people wanting to work in Java or Python or R for getting programmatic access to these ontologies. This is a fully open source project, so you can obviously use our service, but it's also very easy to set up a local instance if you need local access to your own ontologies, and all the code is available on GitHub at that URL there. So what are we loading into OLS? So primarily we're loading the Open Biomedical Ontology set. So this is from the openfoundry.org. This is really the community where most of the life science ontologies are available. And the real goal of the OBO Foundry is to make sure that these ontologies are all interoperable, so that we don't do too much, so that we don't have different ontologies that overlap in scope, and that the community really works together to develop these standards. So all the ontologies that are in the OBO library are automatically loaded into OLS, and this is updated every night. So whenever there's a change in any of those ontologies, they'll get reindexed in OLS. And we also have a bunch of other ontologies that are relevant for EBI data. So the experimental factor ontology is one good example. But essentially, we can load any ontology available in the OBO or AL format into the OLS system. And generally, the criteria is that the ontology has to be relevant and in use for data that we have at the EBI. And in terms of the domains covered, well, like I said before, we have ontologies that cover most of the relevant domains for biology. So primarily we have anatomy, cell types, cell lines, disease ontologies, various ontologies that deal with specific taxa, and ontologies that would deal with gene function, biological process. So I'm going to switch now to the web browser and try a live demo. So if you go to ebi.ac.uk/OLS, this will bring you to the OLS homepage. And there's some information on here, such as the last time OLS was updated. Like I said, it's updated every night, so we check all the ontologies. So this was last checked this morning. We have 150 ontologies, some stats about the number of terms loaded. And really the idea is that this is a search engine like any other. So you can start to type in some terms in here. So let's look for something like a liver. And initially you get a pop-up autocomplete. This is designed specifically so that it's split into two sections. So the first section is if you're just searching generally and you don't know what, if you're not searching for a specific term, let's say. But we also have this jump to feature. So obviously liver appears in multiple ontologies here. So we've got a new liver term in the Uberon ontology, BTO, XAO, EMBL-EBI. So if you know which ontology you're looking for, we provide this convenient feature that you can just jump straight to that ontology, or you can use our generic search engine and get to our default search results like this. So a few things in the search results. So you get a set of results here. You see the identifiers, a description, And in this case, we've got the top hit for liver in the Uberon ontology, and it also tells us that this term is present in lots of other ontologies. So this is probably a good candidate term for a reference description of a term like liver. On the left-hand side, we've got some filtering options. So one thing we can do is click up here on exact match. So this now will only find exact label matches for liver. And we've also got filter by ontology. So again, if you know you're looking for the term in a particular ontology, such as Uberon, we can select that, and now we've filtered this down to a single hit. So if we click on the Uberon term, we can get more information about this term. So up here you've got the description, and here's the tree view. So this shows you the classification of liver within the Uberon ontology. This tree view includes part of and develops from relationships, so you can see these relationships within P show you that that liver is actually part of the exocrine system rather than being a type of endocrine system. And then on the right hand side here we have a whole load of other metadata. So here we have a lot of database cross-references, and in some cases these will actually link out to external resources. We've got some depictions and a whole bunch of other information that Uberon store about this term. Down at the bottom right here, we've got some more logical relationships. So these are relationships to other terms. So this is a kind of flattened view of what you're seeing in the tree. And we also see here related from, so we can see other terms that have relationships coming into the term liver. So this is the kind of flat view, but actually it's sometimes more convenient to look at these as a graph. So if we go over to the graph view button, you can get a graphical view of the network of liver, and all the relationships are down here along the side. So if I want to see terms that develop from liver, so we've got liver bud, which develops from the liver. So you can turn on and off the relationships that you want to see, and you can actually click through on this graph and start to explore the graph in that way, if that's more convenient. So let's go back to the home page for a second. If you're looking for a particular ontology in OLS, you can click through here and you can get the full set of ontologies that you can browse. So if we want to look for something like the experimental factor ontology, we can search in here, and this is the ontology homepage. Now in the ontology homepage, you can download the ontology in various formats. You can link out to the actual homepage, the project page for this ontology. We provide contact information, so if you need to contact the developers of these ontologies, you can do so. And you can also just browse the ontology from the root, so you can see what kind of terms are covered by this ontology. One thing to note here as well is the ontology history tab. So although we don't store every version of ontology, we store deltas between ontology releases. So here we can see now these are all the times EFO has changed and where we've updated a new version. And we also capture the type of changes, or certainly a subset of the changes that we try and detect in each reversion. Primarily we're interested in when new terms are added, so we can see here on the 16th of March, and there was a new release where they added 55 new terms. And you can drill into a particular release. So I'll click on this release and you can get a breakdown of the changes. So we can look at the terms that were added in this release. And one of the useful features here is actually knowing when terms have been deleted. So if you're relying on any public ontology for your data, it's pretty important to know if they've made some significant changes or if any terms have been deleted. And we provide an API to this service as well so that you can monitor terms that you're interested in for significant changes. So we can see here that in this case just a term was added. And again, at the individual term level, there's also a term history tab, so you can see for a given term if it's had any changes to its synonym. In this case, it's just been created, so there's been no changes on this term. I mentioned APIs. You'll see that for pretty much every page in OLS, there's a JSON button up on the top right here where you can actually get access to all this information via the API. For each of the terms, you get all the kind of metadata information, but we also provide you with links within the JSON to be able to navigate around the ontology. So we have links here for parents, links to get all the ancestor terms, links to get graph-based representations of all the information. So it's a really powerful API for interacting with the ontologies. If you go up into the documentations section, we have developer documentation and about the REST API, and there's full documentation here on how to get programmatic access to OLS. The other thing worth noting from the developer documentation is the OLS community, where we're starting to collect third-party community developed libraries for working with OLS. So I think the two significant ones here is the Java client to OLS, and there's an R client to OLS, and we're currently working on a Python client to OLS. So that's everything I wanted to say about OLS in general. I also want to show one other related resource that we're currently integrating into OLS, which is our Zoomer tool. And Zoomer is for when you want to, you've got a bunch of text and you need to map this in bulk to ontology terms. So you can have a look on the Zoomer website for some examples. So here I'm just putting in a bunch of terms where I don't know what the ontology ID is, and you can click the annotate button, and Zoomer goes off and tries to provide the best ontology mappings that it can find. And it does this with some value of confidence because it's actually using data sources that we've already pre-curated at the EBI. So we have knowledge about how certain terms map to ontologies, and you can access this through the Zoomer system. So soon we'll be integrating Zoomer in more within the OLS system so that you have access to all the ontologies in OLS and be able to do this kind of automated annotation. So I mentioned the API. I think this is an important feature with OLS. And like I said, you can get access to all the ontologies and all information about all the metadata about the ontologies themselves, plus about each term in the ontology, and then you can get access to all the relationships between terms in the ontologies. So a really powerful API for interacting with ontologies. And the other thing to mention is all the visualization components have been developed to be generic. So if you're developing applications and you would like to have a graph-based view of some ontology terms or a tree view or one of these autocomplete boxes, we're developing standalone JavaScript libraries so that you can easily take these user interface components that we've got in OLS and deploy these in your own websites or the applications that you're developing. So that may be of interest to some of you. I've mentioned the third-party libraries. So if you're interested in interacting with OLS or ontologies in general, you should check out some of these. All the links are up there. They're all on GitHub, all these projects. And finally, I just want to talk about what's coming next in OLS. So whilst OLS is primarily a search engine for these ontologies, our real interest is in how we map data automatically or semi-automatically to ontologies. So we have lots of data at the EBI that's currently unmapped. So we are now developing extensions to Zoomer to support all the ontologies in OLS and to support large-scale automated pipelines for mapping data to ontologies. And the important thing about the Zoomer system is that it's actually a system where we can learn from previous mappings. So as soon as we do some high-quality curation on some data, whether it's disease or phenotype data, we can feed that back into the Zoomer system so that the next time we see that data or similar data, we can map to ontologies with some higher confidence. Some other work that we're doing, obviously some of these ontologies do overlap in scope, and especially in the area of disease. So we're developing an ontology mapping service where we will have a single point of access to all the cross-references across the disease ontologies and actually any ontology. So any ontology where you can provide cross-references, we'll provide a dedicated service via OLS for this. If there are other services that you think are interesting or would be useful to you, we'd love to hear about them. And this is my final slide here. I've got some links for further information, so you can obviously got the link to OLS. Go to the Open Foundry if you're more interested in the source of the ontologies that are coming into OLS. The Ontogenesis blog is an interesting place if you want a more general introduction to ontologies. There's some good articles there. And finally, some contact information. So if you have any problems with OLS or want to contact us about anything, you can email OLS support at ebi.ac.uk. Or you can also use the GitHub repository. We have an issue tracker there that we follow if you need to submit any bugs or feature requests. This is a slide for some acknowledgements. So I would like to open this up now. If anyone has any questions or if there's any discussion that you'd like, I'm happy to take those now. So I've had a question here from Kenneth about, is it possible to deploy the Zoomer system on a local machine? Yes, so all the code for Zoomer is on GitHub. Actually, I forgot to put the URL up for Zoomer, the GitHub URL for Zoomer. But yes, I think there's documentation as well. I do know of a few groups that have managed to install a local Zoomer. Thomas is asking, is there search query syntax documentation? No, there isn't actually. That would be useful for the search, because we actually, if you're familiar with, we use the Solr engine for search underneath, and actually a lot of the Solr syntax is supported, but that isn't well documented at the moment. We should make a note of that. So another question, what is the easiest way to look up a term for identifiers.org URI? Good question. So I would say that the majority of the ontologies in there, because they're part of the Open Foundry, will not be using identifiers.org. The mapping service that I mentioned at the end, we're using identifiers.org as the kind of canonical URI base for mapping identifiers. So when we have an ontology term that we need to map to a mesh identifier, we'll probably use the identifiers.org URI for mesh, because there is no canonical ontology URI. So I expect that when the mapping service is available, we'll have better support for finding out what the equivalent identifiers.org URI is for any given ontology term. But there's still quite a bit of work at the moment to clean up the namespaces that identifiers.org use with the namespaces that we get from the Open Foundry. So that cleanup is happening now. Okay, so another question. Do you have an automatic system for cleaning up ontologies to ensure that they confer to Open Foundry rules? No, we don't have anything specific. So we try not to touch the ontologies before they come in. We actually get them from the Open Foundry Berkeley server, where they already go through a certain amount of pre-processing there. So we kind of assume that the Open Foundry is taking care of that. And they have pipelines in place that do this kind of checking. So no, we trust what comes from the Foundry. For the other other ontologies that come in, we do certain checks, but these aren't necessarily syntactic checks. We do things like reasoning and classification. We make sure that the ontologies classify. We obviously make sure that they pass with the OWL API, and we have some configuration that tries to clean up things like making sure people are using common predicates for synonyms and descriptions. So we have some internal configuration that we use to detect when an ontology is not using a standard relationship for a synonym, and we do try and fix those. Okay, another question, how would I annotate an object, word or phrase in a research paper with an ontology term? Is there some best practice for that? So I don't know about best practice. There are various tools around that will help you do text-to-ontology annotation. So there's the annotator from NCBO, where I think that they've recently added support where you can upload a PDF and select the ontologies. If you look at the European PubMed Central now, they use the What Is It text mining software, and they've built dictionaries using all the ontology terms in OLS and mined, I think, abstracts from European PubMed Central, and you can actually see that now on the website. And they're using a thing called the open annotation model. So this is a way of annotating some text in a web page to say, here's some text in a document or on a page, and it maps to this ontology term. So there is a W3C standard for doing open annotation on the web, and I think the European PubMed Central have been using that. Is query made using Cypher of any other way? So this is a question from Ashish. So we do use Neo4j underneath. So all the queries that drive the user interface are written using Cypher. We don't currently provide public access to the Neo4j database, but what we are planning to do is to make the Neo4j index available on our FTP site so that you can take that database file, connect it to a Neo4j server, and run your own Cypher queries over the database. And if you look on the GitHub issue tracker for OLS, there's already discussion going on about that, about other projects that have taken the Neo4j dump and using it in their own projects. Is there some service for term inference, i.e. I annotate with some terms and want all identical terms? No, so we do classify the ontologies, but we don't provide any services for querying the inferred versions of these ontologies. Again, the mapping service might be able to help you there, because a lot of the similar terms will be referenced through using the cross-reference mechanism. And one idea in the future is to take some of these tools that do predicted cross-references that may come through, OWL inference, so inferred equivalence, and to add these into the mapping service with the provenance to say these two terms map, and this mapping was generated via an inference. So that information may be available in the mapping service. So someone was asking where the graph view button is. It's there. We probably could make that a bit more prominent. So yes, if you click on that, it'll take you through to the graph view. Okay, I think we're finished there. We've had half an hour. Like I said, get in touch if you're interested. There's a few ways you can get in touch with us, I think I've mentioned now. So thank you all for listening.